Welcome back to the channel. After an eventful international break and set of FA Cup matches which have a great impact on Blank Gameweek 34 and Double Gameweek 33, I'll be discussing my team selection for Gameweek 30, building upon my transfer plans from last week with a few modifications. The wildcard is more possible now, but I'm also possibly holding out for Gameweek 31, if not slightly later in the season. I've only got the bench boost wildcard and free hit chips remaining. I have used the rest of them already, and I have covered all of the chips in detail in my chip strategy guide, discussing the best time to use every single one of them in that chip strategy video. There is also my transfer tips, both versions, the wildcard videos with different drafts, one with Haaland and then one without, and it looks like he's going to miss that Leicester City game after picking up an injury against Bournemouth. So there's a lot to discuss, of course, and everything you need to know will be broken down in this video and across all my FPL content. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so don't miss a single upload or live stream, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Our aim is to get this to over 150 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 33,000 subscribers. Check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and championships, for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, Spotify, and much more can be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. During tomorrow's deadline stream, I'll cover my final FPL challenge squad and also with my own team selection for Fantasy Premier League, but this is how I did for Blank Gameweek 29, and a more detailed review can be found in my Transfer Plans podcast. Matt Sells blanked against Ipswich Town, but he was the hero in the FA Cup, once again in a penalty shootout against Brighton, as Nottingham Forest advanced to the semi-finals. And as discussed in my updated Transfer Tips podcast yesterday, there is actually the possibility of Matt Sells featuring in Blank Gameweek 34, because Nottingham Forest versus Brentford could still be placed in the midweek of Gameweek 34, and that was one of the only scenarios in terms of potential FA Cup semi-finalists still featuring in the blank and not doubling in Gameweek 33. As for my defensive line, it has been a rollercoaster throughout the week. Mykolenko is now yellow flagged, and he was facing Liverpool away anyway, and Everton have terrible fixtures up until Blank Gameweek 34. And Robinson was yellow flagged, but he featured and captained the side in a 3-0 defeat in the FA Cup against Crystal Palace. So Fulham were quite toothless there, and they face Arsenal away next. So Robinson is one of those players who have been great all season for his price tag, but he is potentially on the chopping block. And for those who can go to Munoz, I'd highly recommend making such a move. And Robinson went down in price to 4.9 million, as I'll show you very soon. Gabriel has remained at a constant 6.4 million price tag. He got a 5-pointer against Chelsea, and he only featured in the first game for Brazil, but he was suspended in Brazil's 4-1 loss against Argentina. So he has gotten an extended rest, you could say, and Levi Colwill blanked. He got booked in that 1-0 loss against Arsenal in Gameweek 29. And whilst he does face Tottenham at home this week, there could be the potential for a clean sheet. I still don't think he's really worth keeping in the long term. And over the last couple of weeks, the main reason why I kept hold of him was those fixtures against Leicester and Southampton, where he produced returns in both of them. Of course, that big return against Southampton was more than welcome, but he is not a good FPL asset. As for my midfield, it's also fairly decent on paper, but it could still do with a bit of tweaking. Bryan Mbeumo has been very solid this season, showing real consistency, but I think he could also be offloaded because of Brentford's fixtures. Cole Palmer is still doubtful, but he has been training in the last couple of days, and he actually didn't feature whatsoever against Arsenal, and it was looking like Blank Gameweek 29 was going to be terrible until Bruno Fernandes in the last game produced that massive return with a goal and 2 assists to get 17 points as my captain. So that was more than needed, and that was the game changer for me. Otherwise, it was going to be a quite hefty red arrow. Justin Kluivert also blanked in this game, but he has been very good all season. He got an assist against Man City in the FA Cup, but they still lost 2-1 overall, and Erling Haaland picked up that injury, missed the penalty and scored. Marmoush's replacement also scored the winning goal, and it was Evanilson, who I also bought in Blank Gameweek 29, who scored the opening goal of the FA Cup tie, but he didn't do it in Blank Gameweek 29. And one of my other forwards, Chris Wood, scored a hat-trick during the international break, but in the second match, he picked up an injury, and now it looks like he's going to be out for a considerable amount of time. Nuno Espirito Santo was questioned about this after the FA Cup win against Brighton on penalties, and he said it's not looking good after the scan, but let's wait and see. Hopefully we get more conclusive updates before the deadline, but I'd be very shocked if Chris Wood featured against Man United, and the same can be said about Erling Haaland facing Leicester City and potentially next weekend in the Manchester derby. As for my bench, it was actually the second week running where I got 0 points from every single player, and it was expected this time because it was a blank game week. Both Salah and Isak didn't feature at all. Veltman is still injured, and Valdemarsson is the backup goalkeeper, so there's nothing really to talk about there, but I'm quite happy that I was able to keep Salah and Isak, but there were a few kind of frustrations in Blank Gameweek 29, and ultimately I've forgotten about most of them because of that Bruno Fernandes captaincy haul, but there are some issues going into Gameweek 30 and beyond, which I'll discuss very soon. I got a significant green arrow though, thanks to Bruno Fernandes as my captain, and a few others also deserve a mention, like Robinson with the bonus point and 7 overall, Gabriel and Mbeumo, they all did their part, the rest blanked, and Bruno Fernandes is really the game changer. Without him, there is no green arrow, so I'm around 271k at the moment, and I got 58 points for the game week with a -4 hit being taken, and the likes of Cole Palmer have been a huge headache in recent weeks, but I think those that have stuck with him in Game Week 30 could be rewarded for their patience and loyalty, because Tottenham Hotspur, I think, could really change Palmer's fortunes, and I wouldn't be surprised if Palmer was one of the best captaincy options in Game Week 30. But let's quickly discuss prices before I move on to my transfer plans with one confirmed move. Like I mentioned earlier, Robinson has gone down in price to 4.9 million, and some popular options like Ismail Assar have risen to 5.7 million in price, which could make it fairly difficult for those wildcarding now or making those late transfers. The rest has remained fairly stable over this international break. Matt Sells is 5.1 million now as his overall value, but I bought him in at around 5 million, for example. Mykolenko is still 4.4, but that yellow flag could change things, coupled with Everton's poor fixtures. I think Gabriel will remain at this price tag. Perhaps he might go up to 6.5 million. I think he'll prove to be fairly popular on the wildcard, and with Arsenal likely doubling in Game Week 33 against Crystal Palace and Ipswich Town. You've also got Colwill at 4.4 million, another expendable option. I did sell Veltman though, which I covered in my transfer plans video, so that'll be discussed very soon. And the likes of Salah and Isak, they went down around Blank Gameweek 29, so a couple of weeks ago, but they have now stayed the same, and we could see some price increases for both players. Cole Palmer's gone down a couple of times, I think, in recent weeks, but I think it could punish sellers to quite a big degree, especially those that went for Erling Haaland, for example, and maybe those that have gone there will now go to Bukayo Saka in the midfield instead of Cole Palmer, who I do prefer for the next 2 game weeks, and the rest is pretty much what you expect. I think Justin Kluivert is one of the only players to have risen in price a few times in recent weeks, and even one of them was in the last week or so, which have been covered on this channel as well. So my squad value is now 104.2 million overall, and I've made 34 transfers for the season, and one of them was actually made very early on during this kind of wait in the international break. Veltman out for Daniel Munoz made a lot of sense, and this was before Robinson and Mykolenko were even flagged, and Veltman is still orange flagged at the time of this recording, and I just thought it was about time I sold him. Daniel Munoz doubles in Game Week 32, has a great fixture this week against Southampton away, and he could potentially double in Game Week 33 as well. The quality of fixtures aren't great after Southampton, but I think Crystal Palace have shown real consistency, and they've actually set an all-time record on their travels in terms of winning 6 consecutive games without conceding a single goal. So this transfer is really locked in, and I bought Munoz before he went up in price to 5.1 million. So this happened several weeks ago at this point. But the other transfers I'm considering include Chris Wood out, who is yellow flagged, and this will probably soon be an orange or red flag. And Jean-Philippe Mateta has been cleared. He started the game against Fulham. It was his replacement in Nketiah who got the 3rd goal. But Mateta is still one of my favourite Crystal Palace options for the double in Game Week 32. And against Southampton away this week, he is an underrated captaincy option. But it might be a different forward coming in instead of Mateta. And I am looking at the Man City talisman Marmoush, who I think could really lead that line in Erling Haaland's absence. So that injury might be a blessing in disguise for the Egyptian forward, and he scored that winning goal against Bournemouth, so that could really work for me. But I know I've got 0.2 million in the bank, but I bought Chris Wood at a cheaper price point, so going from Chris Wood to Mateta would probably involve making another move elsewhere, and that would mean a -8 hit overall. But going to Marmoush would be possible, and that's something I'm considering for a -4 hit, but it's not absolutely necessary. I'd either wildcard or stick with what I have, because I've got decent squad depth, and the likes of Vanderson were on my bench in my original transfer plans video. So with all of that in mind, this is my provisional Game Week 30 team selection, and it will be locked in and confirmed during tomorrow's deadline stream, and there are no questions about the goalkeeper. Matt Sells there is facing Man United at home, who have shown some decent form recently, but Forest would still be the favourites. They're third in the Premier League table, and they reached the FA Cup semi-final, so they're having a great season, and Nuno Espirito Santo deserves a lot of credit. Matt Sells has been pivotal in those FA Cup ties, particularly in the penalty shootouts, and it looks like he could be one of the standout goalkeepers in FPL until the end of the season. As for my defensive line, I've got Daniel Munoz, Colwill and Gabriel, so two of them would still be part of my Gameweek 30 wildcard, for example, and I'd possibly add a Gavardio or perhaps going in a different direction, but I certainly could see many upgrades on Levi Colwill. I'm not going to deny that, not just for Gameweek 30, but also in future Gameweeks coming up, but it's not too shabby, I think, and Chelsea have a decent chance of a clean sheet against Tottenham, in my opinion. Being at home, they've got a great record against their London rivals, and in recent matches, they have kept quite a lot of clean sheets, actually, despite that high-scoring thriller we saw earlier this season, where Chelsea ended up coming out on top. But Gabriel, I think, is very solid, despite facing Fulham at home, who have been fairly solid all season. They were quite shaky against Crystal Palace. They were put to the sword. I know they dominated the first 20 minutes or so of that FA Cup tie, but they lost that control in the end. And I think Arsenal could still score a goal or two and keep that clean sheet. That is the kind of safest route to points right now, because despite Saka returning from injury and he could be in the squad against Fulham, I just don't see Arsenal creating many chances and scoring many goals against Fulham, and my predictions will be shown in my deadline stream tomorrow. But Daniel Munoz for me is the standout here, facing Southampton away, and those that have Milos Kerkez, for example, they're definitely worth starting over Levi Colwill this week. There's no denying that. And a lot of people will have benching headaches even in their defensive lines. I'm not going to have such a concern because the likes of Robinson is facing Arsenal away, Mikalenko is facing Liverpool away, and he's yellow flag regardless, so he was never going to be in my starting 11. Let's now look at the midfield, which looks even better in my opinion. I've got the informed Bruno Fernandes facing Nottingham Forest away, so there is a clash between him and Matt Sells, but I've also got Justin Kluivert, who has been so consistent for that price tag. He's on penalties, good underlying stats. There's so much to like with Justin Kluivert, and I'm happy I got off Semenyo, who could do really well against Ipswich Town, but he had a bit of a nightmare against Man City, and he made a mistake which led to Marmoush's goal, and he's one yellow card away from suspension. As for Brian Mbeumo, he's not my favourite option right now, but I'm happy to keep him for the time being. On the wildcard, though, it would be a different story, and moving him on to an Anthony Gordon, possibly even a Jacob Murphy, let alone those Crystal Palace assets like Eze and Ismail Assar, that is high on the agenda. And as for Cole Palmer, I'm quite happy to keep him actually over the next couple of game weeks. I'm not going to call it a mega differential, but I think his returns could lead to a decent rank rise in my mini leagues and the overall standings because of the effective ownership. A lot of people have gone cold on him, but I still think he can do really well against Tottenham Hotspur and also in future game weeks to come. The same goes for Mohamed Salah, of course, who is going to be a front runner for the captaincy, especially with Erling Haaland likely missing that Gameweek 30 fixture against Leicester City. Otherwise, it would have been close, and I would have possibly favoured Erling Haaland if that was the case, purely because of how poor Leicester have been this season, especially under Ruud van Nistelrooy. But to complete the starting 11, I've got two forwards of decent quality. I think Alexander Isak is, of course, right up there. Ivanusson has scored in 3 out of the last 4 matches since making his return from injury. He did blank in Gameweek 29, unfortunately, but I'm still very confident he can do well against Ipswich Town, and even as a short-term punt, that could still work very well if he can get those returns in Gameweek 30. But I don't have Jean-Philippe Mateta, no Marmoush, and I think both of them look really solid. And to be quite honest with you, I think I would need to take a -8 here to bring either one of those strikers in. So that is a bit of a pain, but the wildcard could certainly save me there. I've got a clear idea of blank Gameweek 34 and double Gameweek 33, but there are still a few things that lie in the balance, and a few of these fixtures could still go into double Gameweek 36 instead, and that could certainly throw a curveball and change my chip strategy in general, with the free hit and bench boost yet to be deployed from my squad as well. But I think the starting 11 isn't too shabby, all things considered, so long as Cole Palmer is still available, and it looks like the reports indicate he will start against Tottenham Hotspur. Like I mentioned before, he has been in training for the last couple of days, and I think he will start in that London derby. Otherwise, if I have another yellow flag or two in my starting 11 that pop up, or Palmer is missing out, I might just play the wild card and make wholesale changes, especially with the likes of Levi Colwill, Brian Mbeumo. I'd still sell Bruno Fernandes, despite his incredible form. The fixtures aren't just there yet, and there is no double in Gameweek 33 for either Bournemouth or Man United, so there will be wholesale moves across the board, and that definitely includes my bench, which is looking fairly weak at the moment. Valdi Morrison, the injured Chris Wood, Robinson and Mikalenko, so 2 yellow flags, and I would expect at least one of them to turn into an orange or a red. And in the case of Robinson, he's facing Arsenal away, and Fulham's fixtures are looking quite terrible on paper. So the last thing to discuss with this provisional team is the captaincy, and there isn't much of a debate here. If I had Erling Haaland, it certainly would be a coin toss, but Mohamed Salah takes the armband, and Alexander Isak is the vice. I think players like Mateta, Eze, Marmoush would be great captaincy options, as you'll see in my top 10 list for the captaincy very soon. And keep your eyes peeled for the deadline stream for all the graphics there, and you'll have the updated information and all the graphics you need for the upcoming deadline. But that is my provisional team at the moment. And before I show you a potential Gameweek 30 wildcard squad, because it might be necessary for my team, I also want to showcase the expected points, which have changed slightly from the last week when I discussed them in my Transfer Plans podcast. So Matt Sells has remained the same at 3.7. The same goes for Munoz and Colwill at 5 and 3.2 respectively. All of these figures are taken from Fantasy Football Hub. Gabriel's has gone down by 0.1 to 5.3, but he remains the highest scoring defender according to that algorithm, and Mohamed Salah is top at 8.4. Cole Palmer has gone up slightly to 5.6. The same goes for Bruno Fernandes to 4.9. Both Cliver and Mbuma have remained fairly stable, just around the 5 mark. Evanussen is still at 4.6, but he's now in my starting 11, displacing the injured Chris Wood, who has gone down to 4.2. And Robinson has gone from 2.5 to 2.3 all week, and he's now back up at 2.5 because the yellow flag has been cleared. And Alexander Isak is the second highest at 7.2. The rest aren't really worth mentioning. Mikalenko at 2 and Valdimarsson at 0. It's not a great looking bench, but hopefully most of my players can be fit for Gameweek 30 and beyond. If we look ahead to Gameweek 31 and provide a little preview using the website fpl.team, I could also buy Livramento in my defensive line to replace either Mikalenko or Levi Colwill. I think both of them are expendable at this point anyway. I can buy Livramento and add another double Gameweek 32 asset, but it means I only have 1 Crystal Palace player and 2 from Newcastle. So I still think if I don't wildcard in Gameweek 30, it's highly likely I will in Gameweek 31, bolster my Gameweek 32 prospects, potentially even use the bench boost in that double Gameweek, if not in Gameweek 33, and the free hit could be deployed in Blank Gameweek 34. That is my current plan. It's not locked in and fully set in stone, but that is the most likely scenario at the moment, because I do think there are a few issues with my squad if I don't use the wildcard either this week or in Gameweek 31. And if I were to use the chip, I could build to something like this. So if we look ahead to Gameweek 30 first, I could have David Raya in goal, a back three of Gvardiol, Munoz and Milenkovic, Salah, Cliver, Sarr and Saka, who isn't great for the next couple of weeks in my opinion. He could be on the bench and make some cameos, building up that match sharpness and fitness, but he is a really good asset for double Gameweek 33 in my opinion, where he could be captained. Isak, Marmoush and Mateta is a very solid front line, but I have to say, I don't see a massive difference in Gameweek 30 between this team and my own one. Maybe that's ownership bias and it'll end up being a massive swing against me, but I would have 1.4 million in the bank because I've gone for Jacob Murphy in this draft and not Anthony Gordon. If you have the funds, I definitely recommend going for Gordon instead, but I've got Areola, Murphy, Gabriel and Livramento on the bench, so some benching headaches there for sure. And I have gone for Milenkovic over Gabriel because Raya is already in the starting 11. The captaincy wouldn't really change. Salah will still take the armband, but Marmoush could possibly take the vice. If not, I'll stick with Alexander Isak and go for a more reliable option, so to speak. But for Gameweek 31, I could then have something like this without making any single transfer, and it's pretty much an identical starting 11, and I could start Jacob Murphy this time round, facing Leicester away, and he got a massive return against them in the reverse fixture. Even Anthony Gordon against some of these upcoming opponents got some decent returns in all of those fixtures against Man United, Crystal Palace, and Leicester, of course. So for Gameweek 32, I could bench boost and have something like this with Raya in goal. Areola is the backup goalkeeper facing Liverpool away. I'm not a big fan of that. And I've got a back three of Munoz, Gvardiol and Livramento. My other defenders would be Gabriel and Milenkovic with home fixtures. Murphy, Sarr, Mateta and Isak also have double game weeks, and the single game week options like Saka, Salah and Marmoush are very solid, not to mention Gabriel and Cliver on the bench. But if not, I could bench boost in Gameweek 33, where Areola has a better fixture against Southampton at home, but the likes of Murphy, Livramento and Milenkovic don't, and that's why I would favour the Gameweek 32 bench boost if I were to wildcard this week or in Gameweek 31 with these plays in particular. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What are your plans after the FA Cup matches and how things are looking like for Blank Gameweek 34 and Double Gameweek 33, and I'll discuss everything you need to know in the deadline stream tomorrow, answering all your questions so you're well prepared for FPL. With all the blank and double game weeks coming up, interesting times are certainly ahead in this game, and they will be covered on this channel. Everything you need to know from injury updates, suspensions, players to buy, and much more. Bukayo Saka is ready to go, according to Mikel Arteta in his press conference today. Let's see if he can start from the get-go against Fulham, and he'll be a very interesting asset in UCL Fantasy as well. Those videos are coming out very soon, and another deadline stream next Tuesday for the Champions League. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Our aim is to get this to over 150 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 33,000 subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships, for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you very soon on Tuesday for that deadline stream in FPL, and don't forget UCL Fantasy will make a return over the next week.